Can you hear me okay? Very good, very good. Well, it is certainly a warm day, and I hope you availed yourself of a fan, if we still have fans available if you need a fan. So it's a pleasure to have Reverend David House back again. He was here 2 years ago, and he's a retired United Church minister, of course, from Stanier, and he's lived in many different places and worked in Central America. One thing I should mention that we were chatting about was for those of you who read Broadview magazine, there was an article about him in the last issue about stereoscopes, which are a type of viewers where you put two cards in and then you are actually able to see the image in 3 dimensions. So there was a wonderful article about his collection of those. He hasn't seen it yet, and I can't find a copy of Broadway to give him. At any rate, we're very, very pleased to have him back again this summer. And I think you've seen the announcements, I guess, and so we'll continue on with the land acknowledgement. So we gather in Muskoka on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe peoples, as well as the Huron-Wendat and Haudenosaunee, and give thanks for their stewardship throughout the centuries. Just recently, the Heiltsuk First Nation in Bella Bella, British Columbia, received a wonderful gift. A cedar bentwood box was returned home and welcomed in a ceremony at the Bella Bella Big House after an absence of 150 years. Yes, you have to go to the last slide and click the arrow so that it goes into the main service. There we go. So there's a rather sketchy view of Bella Bella in British Columbia. Now, the question is, what is a bentwood box? Well, it's a box that's made from a single plank of western red cedar. This plank is removed from the tree in one strip and does not harm the tree. The plank is then cut into 3 pieces, and the longest strip is steamed and then formed into a box-like shape, which is pegged to form the basic container. The last 2 pieces are used to create a bottom and a top. This bentwood box is completely waterproof and was used to carry food, such as dried fish, and also important materials which needed to stay dry. These could be musical instruments, ceremonial regalia, or medicines. When partially filled with water, it could also be used to steam food as well, by dropping hot stones from a fire into it. The painstaking and time-consuming craft ensured that every box was unique, and each maker would adorn the box with symbols of his clan. Many featured elaborate painting and carvings. Well, the last question is, why was the box returned to Bella Bella so important? The answer lies in potlatch. Potlatch, the gift-giving ceremony of the West Coast First Nations. It was outlawed by the Government of Canada from 1884 to 1951 as being wasteful and unchristian, and was punishable by imprisonment. At the same time, collectors and Indian agents swept in to take away culturally significant items like the bentwood box, and the Heiltsuk have been trying to retrieve some of these historic pieces which reside in private collections and museums all over the world. This particular box from 1880 was donated by an American couple who felt that it needed to be returned to its original owners. In gratitude, the Heiltsuk gave them a modern bentwood box. Let us be thankful for the wonderful craftsmanship and art of the First Nations, and for an act of kindness that gave them back a piece of their cultural heritage. Thank you, David.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to come up and be with you this morning. It was a lovely drive here from Stainer, and I'm glad to be back. I was away last year because I had two young people from Nunavut living with me for the summer, and they were a handful. They were teenagers, and they'd never crossed the street with a street light. They'd never taken a bus. Well, there were many firsts that we had last summer, and so I was very busy and exhausted at the end of it. But anyway, I'm glad to be here this summer, and thank you for asking me back. I'm flattered. We'll start with the lighting of the candle. Is that right? Someone nod. Okay, thank you. So we light the candle to acknowledge the light of God that is within each one of us. I have the light of God within me. You have the light of God within you. And when we can speak from the light that's in ourselves to the light of another person, then I think it makes the world a brighter place. And the same is true of the church. When the church can find the light that is within itself and speak from that light to the light of the world that is around us, then the world's a better place. We light this candle to remind ourselves of the light within each one of us, the light that we share as a community of faith, and the light that we encounter as we enter the world. That are in the darker print we're going to say together. From Beirut, from New Orleans, from the shores of the Great Lakes, and from cottages and homes in this community, God's people are called to worship. In French and in English and Spanish and Hindi, God's people rejoice in worship. In moments of celebration and in times of loss, in fear and in trepidation, and with bold hearts, God's people join in worship. With love in their hearts, ready to risk, ready to learn, God's people find fulfillment in worship. Let us worship God in prayer and in song, and we'll sing together, All People That on Earth Do Dwell, hymn 822.
God
heads together in prayer. Together we pray. We claim that you are at the center of our lives, O God, yet we are no strangers to things falling apart. We chip away at the center through indifference, through cynicism, through resentments, through the many distractions that we can find in our lives. Like waters rising, wind scattering, sounds deafening our ears, we chip away at the center. But you, in the midst of the noise, rebuke us with your silence. You push back the rising waters of our fears, blow through our emptiness with the breath of life. Be our God. Be the God you promised. Here, now, always. We'll sing again. Do you want to sing now, or do you want me to? Let me see. Let me look at this bulletin for a second here. Let's do the children's time. Will the children please come forward? All right. You're going to make me come out there to you, are you? I brought stuff with me because I was prepared in case there were going to be children here, so I'm not going to waste it. And also, it figures into my sermon. And I may need you. I'm going to play Stump the Organist, okay? You know that game, Stump the Organist?
Yeah.
Yeah. Throw them a curveball and see if they can catch it. So I brought a few things with me. A hammer, and not just any hammer, a good-sized hammer. And also a bell. And so you can have the bell. I'll hold the bell and you whack it, okay? When I tell you to.
Do I have something to whack?
Yeah, me. You whack me here. No, for some reason this song came to mind this last week, and I bet many of you know it. And I'm going to make reference to it later in the sermon. And I recalled the song before it worked itself into the sermon, but anyway, hope it all figures in together. And it's the song, If I Had a Hammer. Do you remember that song?
Yeah.
All right, well there's the hammer. And I should have brought an anvil or something. No. How are your knees? Are your knees okay? Oh, come on. That's a good hammer. Give it a whack.
I don't want to squish the hammer.
There we go. Okay. Can you hear that? All right, and here. Good. All right. So you remember the words to that song? If I had a hammer, I'd a hammer in the morning, I'd hammer in the evening, all over this land. I'd hammer out justice, I'd hammer out warning, I'd hammer out the love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Ooh, if I had a bell, I'd ring it in the morning, I'd ring it in the evening, all over this land. I'd ring out freedom, I'd ring out justice, I'd ring about the love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Ooh. If I had a song, I'd sing it in the morning, I'd sing it in the evening, all over this land. I'd sing about freedom, I'd sing about justice, and I'd sing about the love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Good. Thank you. All right. Thank you. They don't write songs like that anymore. What happened? What happened?
long story.
You're right, Howard. Isn't that a great bell? Now, where were we? We were about to sing that this is God's wondrous world, and we'll sing that at 296 in the Voices United.
And the Lord took me from following the flock, and the Lord said to me,
Go prophesy to my people Israel. Now therefore, hear the word of the Lord. You say, do not prophesy against Israel, and do not preach against the house of Isaac. Therefore, thus says the Lord, your wife shall become a prostitute in the city, and your sons and your daughters shall fall by the sword, and your land shall be parceled out by line. You yourself shall die in an unclean land, and Israel shall surely go into exile away from its land. The responsive reading is Psalm 82, which is in Voices United, number 799. We are going to remain seated. We are not going to sing the refrain. We're just going to read responsively. God stands in the council of heaven. In the midst of the gods gives judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and favor the cause of the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the orphan. Maintain the right of the lowly and destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Save them from the hands of the wicked. You neither know nor understand. You go out in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I say then to you, gods you all may be, and offspring of the Most High. But you shall die like mortals, and fall like any of the mighty. Rise up, O God, and judge the earth, and take all the nations as your possession. Second reading is from Luke, chapter 10, beginning at verse 25 through 37. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, what is written in the law? What do you read there? He answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? He said, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, Go and do likewise. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
I like the graphic. Oh, you changed the graphic. Okay, there we go. Back to same. I like the graphic you chose for the sermon title. Yeah, last year I wasn't able to come because I had these two students that were living with us in, where did I put my sermon? Right here. I had these two students that were visiting with us, and it was a busy summer. And just before they arrived, our beloved 18-year-old cat died. Our cat named T.S. Eliot. It was an orange cat, and it was a fiend from the very beginning. And I won't dwell on, Eliot's virtues and Eliot's brilliance, but he was a good cat. I like that cat. And anyway, after a certain period of mourning, we had these, students come, and then one of them got terribly homesick and was ready to bail in the middle of the summer. And so when we pressed him about, what is it about home that you're really missing? And I miss my cat. And he just turned 17. Anyway, he missed his cat. So we were going to get a cat anyway. We thought, okay, we'll move the date up a little bit. And we went to Barrie, and Jennifer saw this one on some website, I don't know, Come and Adopt Me Cat website. And so we went and got the thing, and it was an orangey white thing, and it was in the cage with a black thing. And we started to drive home, and I got about a mile away, and I said, I can't leave that black one. So now we have two cats. Okay. And they're brothers, apparently, of a different father, I think. But they're bad and they're bold. They're like little wild Philistines. The pair of them running and chasing, and they wage these huge battles against one another, only interrupted by periods of sumptuous grooming of each other, followed by long naps. But they crossed the line, these two characters, when down in my office, one of them jumped up on my bookshelf, and the bookshelf's got to be 5 feet to get up, because I'm down in the basement, and they jumped up on the thing, and they wanted to go and look outside the window. And I'm not telling you which one of them it was. I'm not going to lay blame here. Jumped up on the bookshelf and knocked off a piece of beloved pottery of mine. Smashed it on the floor. Well, I'm down in the basement, and I've never required a door before because Elliot was a good cat. And so I never had a door before, but with Elliot gone and these two hooligans running around the house, I decided I got to put a door on this, or I'm going to have other stuff broken. So I built a wall, and I'm still got to get the door on there, but I've got a barricade up, it's everything's all right. I was right at the very end of getting ready to put the drywall on the door, and I looked at the wall and I thought, even though I used my 4-foot level, it just did not look right. And when I put a piece of drywall up without screwing it on, it really didn't look right. And so I went to the garage and I got this. Well, where are you? I don't want to hit you in the head. Okay. A plumb line. How many of you have one of these in your toolkit? Okay, good. Good, they're still around. So I got the plumb line, and I, put it up against the wall, and even though I used my 4-foot level, it was out. That wall was definitely out. And so, then I got my serious hammer. It's serious, isn't it? It's not your regular. I got my serious hammer and I unscrewed the face, or the floor plate, and gave it a couple of whacks, and brought it back into line, and put the drywall on, and everything looks good. But the plumb line was what told me this thing, regardless of what the level says, this thing was out of whack. I inherited this plumb line from my dad. And, I don't know how many of my friends would even have such a thing anymore or know what to go and look for when they wanted one, because nowadays, what do we use? Laser levels. Yeah, everything's electronic now. The only place to see these things, probably the only place you can get one now, is some garage sale somewhere. Because now it's all electronic and it's laser lines. But when we read that passage from Amos, I heard that reference to the plumb line and realized that this little tool has a long, long history. I don't know who's preaching here next week, and I don't know if they follow the lectionary. That's what I do. When somebody asks me to come out somewhere, I say, look at what the readings are, and I throw my dice in and I work on it. And if it's a passage I haven't preached on before, then I usually pick that one because I got to keep my tool sharp. So I don't know when you're going to hear about Amos again, because Amos only comes up every 3 years. And he's only in 2 readings, so unless next week you hear something from Amos, this is it for the next 3 years at least, and it could be even longer than that. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about Amos because, well, who knows when you're going to hear about him again. He's one of the minor prophets. If I asked you to, could you look him up in your Bible for me, please? You'd be flipping around, I bet, looking for it, because he's a minor prophet. He's in amongst a whole bunch of other little prophets. And he's minor, not because of the message that he has, but he's minor because he's not very long. He's short. He's only 9 chapters long. And we don't know much about him, like we do Isaiah or Jeremiah or others. We don't know much about him except, as it said in this text, he's just a shepherd from a place called Tekoa, and he was of no particular royal lineage. He did not come from a long line of preachers or prophets. More than half of his 9-chapter book, more than half of it is about indictments of Israel. Things that Israel has done wrong, followed by detailed threats of destruction of the land, of the people, of the government, of the religious leaders, everything. And chapter 7, if we read the first 7 verses of that chapter 7 begins with threats. It begins with, I'm going to burn this place down. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to send a swarm of locusts to eat anything that's left on the ground. And then it moves to this image of the walls. The walls of the nation Israel being so out of whack that God has no choice but to pull them down and start again. I don't know about you, but when I first read that, what came up in my mind was Ronald Reagan yelling, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall." Thank you for the echo there. I'll try that again. I don't know about you, but I could hear Reagan saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall." Tear down that wall. Yes. Well, that's what Amos hears God saying to the people of Israel. Tear down that wall. The wall in my basement was out of whack. And so, I had a choice. I could take the whole thing down, rebuild it, or I could give it a couple of whacks and make it right. For Amos, for God, for whom Amos was speaking, it was all about justice, hammering out justice. The nation had lost its way in every way, according to Amos. They'd lost their way, and their economy favored only a few, and not everyone. People couldn't buy houses. They couldn't afford them. Can you imagine that? They had lost their way legally and ethically, and laws were being bent so that people who did stuff that was absolutely despicable weren't going to jail like the rest of us would, because the laws had been bent in their favor. They had lost their way spiritually, and the religious leaders had twisted God. That's who they, Amaziah, I think his name was. That's who Amaziah was. He was the head of he was the moderator. Okay? He was the Pope, he was the whatever, Dalai Lama, he was the head. They had lost their way spiritually, and the religious leaders had twisted God's word to justify all manner of deeds. And they had lost their way politically, following leaders that tickled their ears with false hopes and dreams and all kinds of temptations about what life is going to be like. Well, the temptation for me, when I was reading Amos, and because it's only 9 chapters, I read the whole book a couple of times. I read it in a couple of translations, which is what you should do. Don't just read it in one translation, read it in a couple because they're different. I read through it a couple of times. And the temptation I had while I was reading Amos and hearing of his indictments of his world was to apply it to my listening to the nightly news. And the shock that I have every time I go to the new Foodland in Stainer and walk down the aisles and see how much everything costs. Or when I consider the cost of, well, just about anything these days to what it was 5 years ago. Or when I drive on the roads and zipping by me are these massive trucks that cost half of what I paid for my house. And there's no manure in the back of the thing. There's no bales of hay. I don't know why they want a truck. Well, I guess with the snow, you might need it. But houses. Look at what people are paying for houses on lots that aren't as wide as your pews. Yep. The temptation for me to listen to Amos and to say, hey, I think he's talking about today. And yet I know that's not true. I know that's not true. Yes, there are people with staggering wealth and others with crippling poverty all over this place. But he was writing 1,000 years before Jesus. For Jesus, that was old news. It was well before cars, planes, iPhones, Google, X, and even laser levels. Written long ago, far away, and yet, prophetically, written for here, and now, and this day. This plumb line dangles. Are you still there? Yeah. Okay. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. Okay, touch it. Stop it. Thank you. This plumb line, dangles straight to help us focus on a world that's out of whack. That's what the image is. It's to show us what an upright wall would look like. If I do the same, if I hold this plumb line up just for my own nation, how upright is the wall? If I look at it in terms of our denomination, 100 years old this year, hey, how upright is the wall? If I look at it in terms of my own life, How upright is the wall? That's what the plumb line is for. To bring things back into a line that will support something that can hold the weight of a society and of a people. I sing about freedom. I sing about justice. I sing about the love between a brother and a sister. The days when I feel that the walls are so out of line, I don't know what to do except tear them down. But I don't want to do that. And that's not what Amos wants either. You know, when I think about this, I'm certainly, great at looking at other people's walls and seeing how out of whack they are. Want me to tell you about how out of whack my neighbors are? I'll tell you what their walls needed fixing. You want me to tell you about how other denominations need to get their walls straightened out? The Catholics, the Baptists, the Pentecostals, the whatevers. You want me to tell you how another nation should try and get its walls in order? I'll tell you, I got good eyes for all of that. But what about if the wall is in my own home? After 100 years of being a church, we can look at others and say, they got it wrong. But we need to do that with ourselves too. I can't help but say I was, eavesdropping this morning as there was talk about 50, or not 50 Woodford, not even 85 St. Clair anymore. What is it? It's, anyway, downtown Toronto head office, and how head office is out of whack because it's sending out all these bills and, right. Yeah. It's not just others that are out of whack. It's us too. So let us take those 3 little ideas from our song. Justice, freedom, a vision of a community as brothers and sisters, and apply them, as Amos did, to his world and say, how is my world being unjust and needs a good whack to bring it into line? How is my world out there, in here, needing to be corrected? How is my world needing to hear more about freedom? What does it mean to be free? Free to speak, free to think, free to do, free to have, to grow and develop and use this thing that God gave us. Not just some of us, but all of us. And what about looking at our world as though we're all children? Oh, the candle went, oh, that's telling. That candle went out. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. That candle went out. That's on you. What if it were true when we lit the candle? That the light of God was within everybody, regardless of gender, skin color, pedigree, or all the rest of that stuff that are all prejudices. What if the light of God was within everybody? And we were brothers and sisters in this land. Like that. So one of my, I'm just going to end with this, because it was really probably the most well, I learned the most in my life from this more than anything. So one time units that I served, you know, there, but I principally focused on dementia. So I had 250 people with dementia. And so I saw that disease from one end to the other, from, you know, I don't know where I put my keys, somebody got my keys, you know, to what's a key, to what's a door, you know, and not being able to speak or anything. I saw the disease from one end to the other, let's just say that, with 250 patients. Anyway, and I think you know that I'm a recovering Presbyterian. Okay. So, you know, we like to think of ourselves as God's Jesuits in the Protestantism, because I got serious Scottish book learning from my teachers. And so, you know, I went to that work with all of my education and my experience and all of the wisdom I'd acquired and all the rest of that stuff. And I never felt so naked in my entire life as I did working with that community. It was like they held a plumb line up to me as a person and said, man, are you out of whack? Because to that community, it didn't matter what school I went to, what car I drove, how much money I had in the bank, who I slept with, what my skin color was, how old I was, all of that stuff. That's all prejudice. You prejudge a person based on that, how old they are, what color they are, who they sleep with, how much money they have, what car they drove, and what school they went to. We prejudge, prejudice on that. They didn't judge me on any of that. What they judged me on was, is he kind? Is he truthful? If he says he's coming back, is he coming back? If he says he cares, does he really care?